Good morning, everyone. My name is Vivian from Singapore Water Association. Thank you all for attending today's webinar, Dialogue with the World Bank, Assistance and Financing for the Water Sector. Today's webinar is co-organized by Singapore Water Association, the World Bank, and the International Finance Corporation. Before we proceed, I'd like to touch on some housekeeping rules and disclaimer clauses. To ensure a smooth webinar, please mute your microphone and turn off the camera. You may communicate with us after the session. Please share your questions in the chat, where we'll try to provide answers where possible in the Q&A segment. Do identify yourself so we can respond to any unanswered questions after the session. We'll be recording this webinar and reserve the rights to the video. Please complete a post-event survey, which upon return, will forward the recording and presentation tag to the respondents. All information in this webinar is for general information only and does not contain or convey any legal advice or administrative assistance. Information shared today is true and accurate as of publication date. SWA, World Bank, and IFC reserve all rights in the provided materials. Without further ado, may I now invite Mr. Sutito Saka to brief us on today's program. Mr. Saka, please.
Good morning, everybody, and good evening to some in Washington who are also connected. Thank you all for making time for this session. Before we get into the session, I just wanted to touch on two things. One is on the partnership that we have with Singapore, and secondly, about the topic of the seminar itself. As you know, the bank has a partnership with the Singapore government on infrastructure matters, and this webinar is part of what we do in terms of building awareness and sharing knowledge and exchanging information. So I really would like to thank SWA for reaching out to us, Mr. Guan and also Vivian Song for reaching out to us to make this session possible. We, of course, also work closely with PUB and other players, both in the public sector and the private sector, that cover the water side of the business in Singapore. So I hope they are connected, and I hope we have a good discussion on this topic. Now, for the topic itself, it's very relevant. You know, assistance and financing for the water sector is always a very relevant topic. But now, in the context of COVID-19, this has become even more relevant because utilities are facing financial difficulties. Consumers are also facing financial difficulties in paying for tariffs. Industries that pay for water are also having trouble. So we will hear from a speaker from the World Bank on how we from the World Bank are helping in utilities like to address this issue of liquidity. We also have sessions from East Asia and the South Asian context to hear how we have done business water side in these two kind of regions of Asia. And also we have some inputs from IFC, the private part of the World Bank. So I think we'll have an interesting session. We do have a Q&A session at the end. So after all these presentations are made, we'll open it up and then let's hear some questions and let's again have this exchange of information. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Tan Guan, who is the president of the Singapore Water Association. And over to you, Mr. Guan.
Mr. Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Saka. Good morning, everybody. Ms. Jyoti Shukla, Director of World Bank Singapore, Ms. Patricia Lopez, Ms. Lilian Pina Pereira Weiss, Dr. Smita Mishra, Mr. Sun Hao, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all to today's webinar, jointly organized by the Singapore Water Association, the World Bank, and IFC, and is titled Assistance and Financing for the Water Sector. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is far-reaching and much deeper than many of us could have expected just a few months ago. It is a disease that is unlikely to be completely under control until an effective vaccine can be made readily available, and nobody knows for certain when that will happen, despite the tremendous efforts and resources being channeled by governments and the scientific community towards it. Therefore, efforts to reopen the economy have understandably been a cat and mouse exercise as countries try to strike the right balance between lives and livelihood. What this means is that the economic recovery will be patchy and uncertain and could last longer than many of us hope. It could also result in a prolonged global recession, and in the worst case scenario, will impact the developing economies disproportionately. It is therefore timely that the World Bank and IFC have moved quickly to step up support as countries respond to the COVID-19 crisis and identified water as a critical infrastructure that should be one of the priorities as governments focus on providing an economic response to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. So we look forward to hearing some of the details of these support schemes and hope that our members will take advantage of these schemes to not only seize new business opportunities, but also contribute to the region's overall response to the pandemic. I would just like to take a few minutes to introduce the Singapore Water Association. SWA started in 2004, and today we have around 260 members with a diverse mix ranging from large local enterprises, MNCs, SMEs, research institutions, and even individuals, covering activities across the whole water value chain to create this vibrant water scene in Singapore and beyond. SWA has played and will continue to play a vital role in solidifying Singapore's status as an emerging global hydro hub and provides a platform for our members to actively engage in the development of a future-ready, innovative, and sustainable water infrastructure in the region and globally. Today's webinar with the World Bank and IFC contributes towards this objective. COVID-19 has greatly impacted our members. SWA is working closely with our members to help them mobilize, stabilize, and resume operations through various initiatives such as regular updates and dissemination of the various government support schemes available to our members. SWA is also working with the Singapore Business Federation, Employment and Employability Institute, Enterprise Singapore, Skills Future Singapore, and several other partners in assisting local companies to implement jobs placements and retraining through training and financing schemes, as well as business sharing sessions. In April, we launched the SWA Marketplace Assist platform, SWA MAP in short, for our members to seek help from fellow members and partners. The aim is to facilitate business continuity within the SWA community and to tide over the challenges and disruptions to the supply chain during this crisis. In closing, I look forward to hearing from the World Bank and IFC and hope that our members will take advantage of the various schemes available to seize business opportunities that will arise from the region's response to the COVID-19 crisis. The Chinese character for crisis consists of wei, meaning risk, and qi, meaning opportunity, and therefore we should not be totally focused on the risk alone. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Guan. I think you provided an overview of what SWA does and also how session is so important given the current context. I understand Jyoti has some technical difficulties and her computer crashed. She's not online. I think we may have to improvise a little. I think what we should do is maybe get started with the World Bank portion of the presentations. Maybe Jyoti can come back online, then she can have her remarks, and then we can continue with the presentation from IFC. That's okay. So with that, I'm going to turn to the three presentations that would be made from the bank. First, utility, liquidity facility, and financial impact assessment. That would be presented by Patricia Lopez, who's a senior infrastructure finance specialist in the bank based in Washington, D.C. Then we will hear from Lillian Pena-Weiss on the East Asia operations of the World Bank's water business. Then from Dr. Smita Mishra on the bank's operations in South Asia. A quick introduction to these speakers. I think you see it on the screen, but very quickly, Ms. Lopez is a senior infrastructure finance specialist in the World Bank Group. Most recently, she worked in the Danube program based in Austria. And in the bank, she has worked on many activities, including providing policy advice on financial and institutional issues to national, regional, and local governments. Before she joined the bank, Ms. Lopez worked for different investment banks and consulting firms, advising governments, utilities, and private companies. In the bank, she has mainly worked in Latin America, Caribbean, Europe, and Eastern Europe region. Ms. Lillian Weiss, she has, as you see, about 17 years of experience in bank operations, mainly in Latin America and East Asia, but she has also worked in Africa and Europe. She delivered 15 World Bank finance projects in the water sector, including strengthening water utilities, working on environmental sanitation topics, community-driven development, digital modernization of water utilities, etc. She's based in Singapore. And Dr. Smita Mishra has a PhD from the Delhi School of Economics, and she also has more than 20 years of experience in the water business. She's done a number of operations in India, including Kerala, Uttarakhand, Simla, and other places. But she has also worked globally on a number of different initiatives, which includes citywide inclusive water supply, looking at water use and reallocation and implications for economic growth, especially relevant for today's topic, improving urban water services, taking lessons from international practices, and also the review of water schemes in India. So here we have, three speakers with a lot of relevant experience in this sector. And without any further words, let me just turn to Patricia. Over to you, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sudipto, for the introduction and welcome. And good morning to everyone connected. Thank you, Mr. Wang, also for the opening remarks. It is my pleasure and my honor to be participating in this dialogue of the World Bank Group with the Singapore Water Association. I am going to be presenting today some of the tools that our Water Global Practice has been working on in the last few months to help our clients confront the COVID-19 pandemic, which indeed has posed an unprecedented challenge for our societies and for our economies. A big part of our Water GP response, we can maybe go to the first slide. Thank you very much, Ms. Vivian. A big part of our Water GP response has really focused on working with the service providers across the broad spectrum of water services, including irrigation and other water services, but mostly with a particular focus on water sanitation and hygiene services, given the essential nature of these services, especially hand washing in the response to the pandemic and the prevention of the further spread of the disease. And indeed, the water and wastewater utilities have faced the challenge of keeping the water flowing, keeping the services in continuity, while the outbreak has placed substantial pressures upon them, pressures that have come mainly in three ways. First, a reduction in collected revenues. Secondly, reduced availability of essential inputs, including chemicals, even fuel and spare parts in many countries. Also, staff absenteeism from work has been an issue which many of the utilities have been facing, given, in many cases, lack of personal protective equipment for all the staff. And the third challenge is a deferral of investments in planned capital expenditures, including for asset rehabilitation or for expansion of services, as governments turned to fund the emergency, particularly in the health sector. We can go to the next slide, please, Ms. Lillian. So, of course, the reduction in collected revenue has mostly been derived from greater inability from households to pay the bills, particularly the lower income households, due to the loss of jobs from many citizens and their sources of income, and different protection mechanisms put in place by governments, like generalized moratoria for bill payments, or a prohibition of utilities disconnecting customers for lack of payment, etc. And these, coupled with increased costs in many countries to expand the services to vulnerable communities, and the reduced demand also from commercial and industrial customers, has had an impact on the cash flows of water utilities, many of which in developing countries are currently struggling to pay the salaries or other basic inputs. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Water GP has focused on the development of two very specific tools for governments and utilities to address some of these challenges. I will focus today on two of them. The first one is a working paper with considerations to be taken by key decision makers to provide financial support and liquidity to the water utilities to be able to keep business continuity. And the second tool is a financial modeling tool to quantify the impact in the cash flows of water utilities. These tools have been developed with funding support from the GWSP, the Water Security and Sanitation Partnership. This is a multi-donor trust fund hosted by the World Bank. And of course, we are very grateful to the donors for enabling such a speedy response on our part. And just to mention that the Water GP response also includes support at national country level, which is happening in a variety of countries, to both quantify the impact of the pandemic on water services and also to provide a comprehensive response to the emergency at sectoral level. There are other initiatives by the Water GP, such as the Utilities of the Future initiative, or a global program on policies, institutions, and regulations, a global program on citywide inclusive sanitation, and also a global initiative on circular economy and resilience, which are also have been very active in developing response mechanisms. And of course, we've been working jointly with the IFC and MIGA as one World Bank group, alongside private sector and other partners to be able to provide a response. We can go to the next slide, please, where I will give a few highlights of the first tool I mentioned, the Considerations for Financial Facilities paper. So just some general remarks. First, the objective of this paper is to lay out the options and the considerations, focusing on not giving specific recommendations, as this is a global paper, and the specific features of any liquidity facility will very much depend on the local context, the scale of the pandemic hitting the country, the state of the local finances, the institutional arrangements, capacity levels, etc. The audience for the paper is mainly governments or policy makers, and also the World Bank country teams advising and working with governments. And of course, the whole exercise was driven by a sense of urgency to act, given the need for business continuity and the essential nature of services provided. We can go to the next slide. This slide, the highlights really is that the paper is looking at the possibilities for governments to establish standalone facilities for water sector, or in some countries, governments have considered multi-sectoral facilities encompassing several basic services, water, electricity, transport, other infrastructure sectors. They could be set up potentially at regional, national, or subnational level. And then the paper goes on to different technical considerations related to specifics of water utilities. And of course, the aim is to help decision makers incorporate context-specific factors, such as the economic situation, the scope and scale of the crisis, and institutional and capacity considerations when putting in place such facilities. We can go to the next slide. This is a summary, actually, of the main considerations that the paper looks at. They can be grouped in three main categories. The first is the sources of funds for such facilities. And the paper discusses a number of financing options, which of course very much depend on the country's overall fiscal balance situation, the borrowing ability, access to financial markets, etc. In terms of course, of the access to different instruments, the World Bank financing instruments can be considered. And we have been looking with the IFC and others at the whole array of our instruments to be able to fund these kinds of facilities for countries. The second group of considerations is the institutional arrangements to manage such a facility. We have in the slide an array of the options that the paper discusses, including Ministry of Finance, a National Development Bank, commercial banks, etc., line ministries. But the paper does make a case for using existing institutions rather than going ahead and creating new institutions for such setups, obviously for reasons of speed and reducing transaction costs. And the third kind of considerations is the modalities and the conditions for the disbursements. So the first of them being the modality of the funds to be made available to the utilities. Are they going to be made available as grants, loan guarantees, or even a mix of all of them, like a hybrid modality? Also, the amount to be provided, should this be equal to the amount of revenue lost or enough to cover the essential expenditures required? Also, any conditions or restrictions to be set on the use of funds provided by the facility, whether specific providers should or could be prioritized. For example, those providers that are giving services in vulnerable communities, or maybe just making certain types of expenditures eligible, like salaries or energy costs. And this has been the choice of some of the governments we are working with to put in place these types of facilities. And last, a very important recommendation or consideration that the paper looks into some detail is whether the facility should just be providing the access to much needed financing during the pandemic, or should it be used to promote a reform agenda in the country. There is, little doubt, and based on the World Bank knowledge, that many utilities in developing countries still need to adopt reforms in certain areas, including tariffs, finance, governance, management, which have been proven to work in other utilities over decades. Now, that being said, is this the right time to promote these reforms through a financial facility, which the overriding aim at this moment is to help the utilities financially respond to the pandemic. Insufficient quantities and time is of essence to allow the utilities to keep functioning as their cash receipts are plummeting, or the paper is looking also at cases where adding some conditionalities to the provision of funds could be favorable to implementing a reform process, and also some cases where actually the reform conditionalities could backfire, including delays or lack of capacities to comply with the conditionalities by the utilities, and therefore resulting in slow disbursements. We can go please to the next slide.
Patricia, sorry,
yes?
Patricia, because of
yes.
time constraints, could I ask you to please hurry up?
Yes. I will be we can skip this slide because it's really a little bit of a repetition of yes, and we can go to the next one, probably to yes, we can go to the next still, and this is just a summary of the financial modeling tool, which basically is a very straightforward financial model intended to work out the cash flow deficits in utilities over a 12-month period, applying it through a three-step process. First, to develop a baseline, assuming the normal pre-COVID-19 situation. Then to develop a financial impact assessment, assuming the impact, calculating the impact on certain operations and finances, and then to use the results to develop an emergency response plan. We can go then to my final 3 slides, where I wanted to go beyond the 2 tools that I've mentioned, and provided the tools, actually the links in the presentation, so that participants can access them after this dialogue. And the slide on the screen is presenting the World Bank Group response. Yes, the former slide, please. Which includes 4 parts: saving lives, protecting the poor and vulnerable, sustainable growth and job creation, and rebuilding better. And as you can see, the water response cuts across the 4-pillar World Bank Group response. We can go to the next slide, which is a glimpse of the Water GP Strategic Action Plan, focusing on 3 pillars: sustaining water resources, delivering services, including water and sanitation, but also optimizing water for agriculture, and third, building resilience, recognizing the link between water and fragility and conflict, but also considering the need to build resilience to pandemics such as the COVID-19. And if we go to the final slide, I would just like to mention that one of the critical gaps that the COVID-19 has exposed is with regards to the urgency of completing and focusing on the SDG achievement. We need innovative approaches in both in three different pillars: technologies, procurement, and financing. And I see that you are not currently seeing the slide, so I will be very, very brief. We can definitely work with partners such as the Singapore Water Association in these three pillars. In technologies, we need new and improved technologies across a wide range of areas. In procurement, we want to promote innovation as well, and meaning processes that are transparent and efficient and that can facilitate equal access and open competition. And we have a new procurement framework since 2015, focusing on value for money and fit for purpose processes. And third, on financing, we are working closely with the IFC, MIGA, and others to enhance and expand financing transactions with commercial financing and involving the private sector. And there are a few areas of focus, upstream work like tariff reforms for financial viability, but also focus on working with the utilities on making them financially viable and credit-worthy to access in the future commercial financing. This last slide just has a few examples of innovative financing and partnerships, but since my colleagues are covering some examples from our portfolio, I will not further delay this presentation in the interest of time. So let me stop here. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity. And we are available for any questions on the specific tools that have been presented today.
Thank you, Patricia. And I hope we can stay on a little longer when we have the Q&A session. I think Jyoti is back on the line. The technical difficulties are probably over.
I am,
so
yeah.
Could I ask you to say a few words, your opening remarks, and then we can come back to Lillian and Smita?
No, so first of all, my apologies. I think after two months of working from home, the computer finally needed a rest. It just blanked out on me. But I don't want to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but really to thank SWA, Mr. Tan Cheng Guang and Vivian Song, as well as all the partners. I think the most important message we wanted to convey from our part, and this is picking up on Patricia's presentation and going on to my colleagues on IFC's presentation, is that COVID is a special challenge, and on part of the World Bank Group, we are committed to scale up dramatically our response to work with our client countries, which as a development institution for us, of course, this is a special challenge because this is the first time in many decades we will see an increase in global poverty. And water and sanitation will remain a very important part of this response because clearly, apart from safe distancing, that is one of the most effective measures. So our ability to work with the public sector as well as the private sector is really what brings the special value added. So I really wanted to thank all the SWA members as well as the SWA leadership for starting this dialogue, and to assure you that we, on the World Bank Group side, we want to be able to work with you together on the public sector side, as Patricia and Lillian will talk about, as well as on the private sector side, as Hausun will talk about, to see how we can scale up. And we're looking at almost $160 billion in resources over the next 15 months. The initial set of resources have been focused a lot more on the health emergency as well as the economic recovery and social protection. But as we move to the restructuring and recovery phase, a lot more assistance will move to infrastructure, and important infrastructure looking at the health emergency. So water and sanitation will be important. So without interrupting too much the flow of this conversation, let me hand back to you. And once again, my apologies for having to drop out at some point. Vasudipta, back to you.
Thank you, Jyoti. And we're glad that you could reconnect. So kind of to keep with the flow of conversation, can I turn to Lillian?
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just... Can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning, SWA members. I am Lilian. It's a pleasure for me to be with you this morning and share a little bit of our the World Bank vision and portfolio for Asia in the water sector. Yeah. So I will share this presentation with my colleague Smita Mirza. I will cover the East Asia part and she is going to cover the South Asia part. So we have two batches of it. Very quick, I'm sure all of you is familiar with the current global water challenge, which are not new, and day after day are getting challenger. So water is getting dirtier, is getting scarcer, and also water allocation is getting more and more unpredictable every day due to climate change and other factors. On top of it, we also see that economic shocks will reduce the level of investments to address all these challenges. And this is something that is not really how the future will look like, but this is very present. This is something that we are facing and living right now. And in parallel to that, water really touches on every important sector, right? Water is a key element for agriculture, for the cities, for energy, environment, and etc. So the challenges are huge, and the bank is doing the best possible way. We're trying to support the global water agenda. So how is the bank doing that? And my colleague Patricia has already presented some of our recent tools and strategies. And here I'm starting by showing how we have structured our knowledge agenda. As you probably know, the bank, we do provide loans and financing of investments across developing countries, but we also have a strong knowledge agenda in parallel to that. So starting with that, our knowledge agenda is basically structured around 5 priority themes, from sustainability, which relates to managing the water for current and future generations, inclusion, making sure that everybody has access to water for development needs, finance, leveraging public and private funds to cope with the water sector needs, and resilience, which relates to building the capacity to respond to climate change and other shocks. And connecting these 4 pillars, we have the pillars on institutions. Since expanding access, improving the quality of service, depends on having solid institutions that can manage resources and promote policies that will provide a better enabling environment for sustainability, inclusion, finance, and resilience. So in broader lines, this is how we are structure our knowledge, and the knowledge, of course, feeds into our operations. Getting to our portfolio. So the bank has active agenda, active projects across different subsector within the water sector, in which more than half of it is related to water supply and sanitation operations. 30% is about water resource management, including floods management and other related activities. About 11% is irrigation and water in agriculture in general, and 4% in other water-related subsectors. In this slide, I'm showing a snapshot of our portfolio at global level. We have nearly $30 billion in active portfolio, in active projects. of which about 37% is located in Asia, about 11 billion US dollars, adding East Asia and South Asia together. And after the two Asias combined, our largest portfolio is in Africa, with about 7.8 billion US dollar in active projects there. So this is a quick snapshot. If someone is interested, we can provide more details offline. Getting deeper in East Asia, we currently have about 33 projects active under implementation, of which about half of them are urban water supply and sanitation projects. And 15% are related to water resource management, and other subsectors follow. Our largest portfolio is in China, with current 11 projects, followed by Vietnam and Indonesia. And these numbers change all the time since projects close and new projects come in, but this is the current status we have. In terms of pipeline, from the fiscal year that just closed last week, that was FY 2020, looking forward to FY 2021 and 2022, we are planning about 1.5 billion in new lending to the countries in the region, of which the three projects shown here for FY 2020, China, Kiribati, and Timor-Leste, they are actually already approved. So they are now part of our active portfolio. And the rest are currently under preparation, planned to be approved in the next 2 years. These are all tentative amounts because the projects are obviously not approved yet, but this is where we are heading to. And among this, within this pipeline, about half of it will be dedicated to urban water supply and sanitation, and another roughly a half of it to water resources management. And now I'm gonna quickly present just some selected projects so you can have an idea of the typology of projects that we have been supporting in the region. So one example from Indonesia is the National Urban Water Supply Program. We call it NUWAS. The project has the objective to increase access to improve the water services using an arrangement in which the PDANs, the local water operators in Indonesia, are incentivized to improve their performance and access level of investment depending on how they link to their operational progress, right? The project, although the project was approved in 2018, it's still relatively early stages of implementation. So it's still there's a lot to happen there. Another example, this one from Vietnam, from the irrigation subsector, is the Vietnam Irrigated Agriculture Improvement Project. This project has been in implementation for already some time. It's moving towards the end. And this is quite a successful project, not only in increasing access to irrigation services, but also piloting climate smart agricultural practices. This is quite an interesting project in the irrigation subsector. One example from the Philippines is our flagship project on floods management, the Metro Manila Flood Management Phase 1. The project has the objective of improved drainage services in some selected Metro Manila areas, together with two strong components on solid waste management and also participatory housing and resettlement to minimize the risks, the socioeconomic risks for the population around flood-prone areas. Although the project was approved in 2017, it's still in relatively early stages of implementation. So there's still a lot to happen there as well. On China, we have selected one project to share a little with you. That's the Lianing Safe and Sustainable Urban Water Supply Project. This project, in addition to financing works to expand access, water treatment facilities, etc., it has a very interesting component on non-revenue water, energy efficiency, and modernization of water utilities through the introduction of smart water systems. This project is also in relatively early stages of implementation since 2018. And finally, we have two recent projects in Cambodia and Laos, respectively. The project in Cambodia, a small town water supply and sanitation improvement project, it has started last year. And among different components, this project is financing the expansion of the sewage system in Siem Reap. So we expect that the impact of this project will be highly positive for that important area in Cambodia. The project in Laos, scaling up water supply, sanitation, and hygiene project. This is focused on rural areas. And one interesting feature of this project is the matching of water supply and sanitation service with hygiene, health, and nutrition activities, all combined in an integrated way. This project is also recent. It has started last year, and it's being watched closely how the impact can be optimized by having this set of interventions converged in the same area with similar approaches. I will stop here and hand the presentation to my colleague, Smita, and I'm available to any clarification, follow-up questions or details on our portfolio as you wish.
So we're running behind on time, Smita. You could quickly have your presentation done in 10 minutes, if you don't mind.
Sure. So let me just get to my presentation. So good morning, everyone, and I hope you can see the slides. Yes?
Yes,
so,
we can see the slides. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sudipta. So very quickly, this is on South Asia, and the problems that we see in South Asia are quite similar across the different countries, whether we look at India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, or Pakistan. And what we find is increasing demand, a huge stress on resources, and inefficiencies in supply. And this is mainly because of rapid urbanization. What we find is the cities expanding, especially in the peri-urban areas. There's huge inefficiencies in the water supply system, whether we look at the drop per crop, or whether we look at human consumption, the non-revenue water, the leakages, these are huge everywhere. And no doubt that the health outcomes are poor. What we find is levels of stunting and wasting, they are not consistent with the actual progress that's happening in poverty reduction and expansion of access. So the bank's program in South Asia focuses on helping governments, and this is mainly to preserve the scarce resource, groundwater management, basin level management. There are many projects looking at how to start looking at efficiencies and equity across the sectors: irrigation, drinking water supply, sanitation, and of course, resilience, which is becoming very, very important due to the climate change impacts. So let me get to the, next slide. And this is a quick slide on the water portfolio in South Asia. This is on the pipelines. We find around 14 projects. Of course, this is dynamic. Some of the projects have just gone to the board, and this gives a distribution of the pipeline 2022. And here is a spread of the projects across the sectors. So we find urban water supply and sanitation having the largest share in South Asia, about 50%. Water resource management, the next 19%. and then rural water supply and irrigation about 12% each. So getting into some of these projects, just for illustrative purposes, starting with India, we have the Karnataka Urban Water Supply Modernization Project. And this project has been for quite a few years. It has demonstrated 24/7 supply in specific wards. And now it's scaling up the citywide access to continuous pipe water supply in 3 cities in Karnataka, very much focusing on institutions building capital investment program. And this is about $100 million. The other project, which has recently gone to the board, is the second National Ganga River Basin project. And this is focusing on reducing the pollution from various cities and other areas which are on the bank of the river Ganges. And as you all know, the river Ganges is the largest, one of the largest rivers in India, which cuts across many states in northern India. And here the components are institutional development, infrastructure development. Interestingly, there is an IBRD guarantee also included here so that the project can leverage funds from the market. And of course, contingency emergency response, because this has just gone to the board and is very much looking at response to COVID as well. Second, Shimla, Himachal Pradesh Water Supply and Sewerage Service Improvement Program. The first one was through a DPL, which was highly successful. And now the government of Himachal Pradesh is scaling up the policy and institutional development program. And this is mainly to improve water supply sewerage services. So moving from fragmented responsibilities to unified responsibilities through a water supply sewerage company. And this is the first of its kind established in India. And of course, this is looking at policies institutional development program. The second one is under preparation, would be roughly about $200 million, but yet to be determined. Then there's a Chennai City Partnership Program. This is very interesting. The World Bank has got into a multi-sector city partnership program with Chennai, with the government of Tamil Nadu. And it includes policies, institutional reforms for the Chennai Water Supply Sewerage Board, along with looking at transport-related activities, with urban-related activities, etc. And this is under preparation. There's been about a few months of preparation, so very early stages. And Pakistan, the Karachi Water and Sewerage Service Improvement Project. This is a very important project which is improving access to safe water services. And it's looking at both institutional and policy development programs along with infrastructure investments. The approval date was June 27, 2019. It's about $40 million of World Bank financing out of a total of $100 million of the total project cost. Coming to Afghanistan, the Water Supply Sanitation Services Institutional Support Program for Kandahar City. This is another very important project which is improving access to water supply. And this is really looking at infrastructure and efficiency improvements both, along with sector reform and institution strengthening program. So this is under preparation, is expected by July 21, about $52 million of bank financing out of a total project cost of $232 million. Coming to Bangladesh, the Municipal Water Supply and Sanitation Project. This is focusing on increasing access to improved water supply sanitation services, along with strengthening the municipalities and strengthening the institutional capacities, which is very, very important, especially in Bangladesh. And the components, of course, are looking at sector support, capacity strengthening, and the investment program, etc. So this has recently gone to the board, July 2020, $200 million of bank financing. Coming to the other project in Bangladesh, the Dhaka Sanitation Improvement Project. This is addressing access to safely managed sanitation services in select areas of Dhaka. The components here are institutional support, infrastructure, which includes sewage and wastewater treatment, and of course, it includes a contingent emergency response as well. It has recently gone to the board, March 2020, $340 million. Coming to Bangladesh again, on the pipeline side, the rural water sanitation and hygiene for human capital development. So this is another interesting project which is looking at improving access to safely managed water supply sanitation in selected areas of rural Bangladesh. So it's a rural water supply sanitation project, very much focusing on investments in water supply sanitation, helping to expand access to safe and portable drinking water in the rural areas of Bangladesh, along with COVID-19 emergency response as well. So $400 million of financing. Then there is the Jamuna River Economic Corridor Development Project, again, Bangladesh, and another very interesting project, which basically is looking at the navigation channel, flood and riverbank protection, strengthen capacity of institutions. And here, of course, this is looking at both infrastructure and capacity building and institutional development, including 3D modeling and piloting of new river training technologies. So this is one of the first of its kind, very interesting project with about $800 million of financing. And then there is the Sri Lanka Water Resource Management Project, which is addressing strengthening the management of water resources. And this is for targeted river basins. And this includes establishing strong regulatory frameworks, looking at water allocation among users, and improving use of water resource information. Another very, very important project, and helping to strengthen institutions in managing water resources and in investments in infrastructure, enhancing safety and security of dams. So this is about $200 million of financing. Let's come to the useful resources, which would be very helpful for anyone trying to look at how to contact the bank. And here are some websites. So the World Bank Group website is here. Also, the World Bank Water Global Practice website is given here. And then on procurement, the websites are given. And on projects also, all these projects are there on this website. So this would be shared with all of you. And let me thank you. And we'll be happy to take up the questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Smita. I see many people are connected. So as we are making these presentations, please do feel free to send questions in the chat box. We'll pick them up and we will have a Q&A session at the end. I think, from the earlier presentations, you got a sense of what the bank is doing, both on the helping the utilities with the liquidity facility, and also you got a sense of our operations in East Asia and South Asia. And this may lead to some questions, but let's carry on with the conversation. Let's turn to IFC now. As you know, IFC is the private arm of the World Bank, and the presentation from IFC is going to be made by Hao Sun. He's based in our Beijing office. Hao Sun is a senior investment officer based in Beijing. He's, of course, working on various infrastructure projects, including water and wastewater. He has been with the IFC for 14 years, both in Washington and also in China. And before he joined the bank, he had worked for DEG, which is a German investment and development corporation, which is part of the KfW banking group. And in that role, he had completed more than 10 transactions in China, covering various industries, manufacturing, agribusiness, banking, and infrastructure. So welcome, Hao, and over to you.
Thank you, Shubhita. Good morning, everyone. This is Hao, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm very glad to join this webinar because Singaporean companies are very active in the Chinese water market. So in the past years, I have been talking with quite a lot of Singaporean companies, and I believe many of them are members of SWA. So I think some of you may heard about the name of IFC. IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, and it's different from the IBRD. IFC provides our products in terms of investment and advisory, and all of IFC's investment products are on the commercial basis. So our projects has to be economically and financially viable. And the role of IFC is really to support and promote the private sector development in the emerging countries. And in the water and sanitation sector, IFC's long-term business plan is really in 3 pillars. On the very left, so in the mature markets, IFC can work with the private sponsors as well as municipal governments on sub-sovereign utility projects. So we can directly financing the commercially viable water and sanitation projects. And then in more challenging markets, including the IDA and FCS countries, IFC's role is really helping the government and helping the private sponsors to try to open the market and create the market. And on this area, we work quite a lot with the IBRD colleagues, the World Bank colleagues, in terms of the utility level transformation, policy reforms, etc. And then on the right, the third pillar is supporting the innovation, the innovative business and business models, as well as the new technologies, and trying to help them to scale up those innovative technologies in the emerging markets. So what IFC can offer to the private sector, the 2 major products are investment and advisory. As I just mentioned, that IFC takes the commercial risk. So we can offer a very broad range of financing products, investment products, like from the corporate loans, the project loans to equities, and also we can do syndication. And one product that I would like to introduce a little bit is this one, Infra Ventures. So this one is basically a venture capital within the infrastructure group. With these products, IFC can support the private companies doing the early stage project development in the challenging markets. We can share a certain amount of the developing costs, like the feasibility study or EIA studies, etc. And this cost would be, IFC will take the full commercial risk in this project developing stage. And then advisory business, IFC can work with the governments and the financial institutions as well as private companies, and helping the government to design a financially viable PPP structure, and we can help capacity building with the banks and other private companies. And then IFC has designed a special program, we call it Managed Co-Lending Portfolio Program, MCPP. So you can consider this as a fund for debt financing, because there is definitely a strong financing needs in the infrastructure space in the developing countries. But on the other side, a lot of these international institutional investors, they don't really familiar with the market in these emerging markets, and they don't really dare to go in and lend money to these infrastructure projects. So by collecting and managing this debt financing from institutional investors, IFC can provide an entry point for these institutional investors. And IFC is taking full responsibility of infrastructure projects collection and appraisal and the portfolio management, etc. So, and then once the IFC project is committed, these MCPP investors can automatically mirror and match the debt financing together with IFC. So going forward, the MCPP partners can build up a diversified portfolio of infrastructure loans together with IFC. And this Wiki is also another interesting program. It's called Water Investment Growth Initiative. This is jointly developed between IFC and the McKinsey. So this is a model that helps us to quickly understand and compare the status of water sectors in different countries and identify the problems. And this can help us to quickly identify which are our key markets and how and where we can allocate our resources in the water sector in different markets. So this is the history of IFC's investment in the water sector in the past years. Before year 2000, our key markets are mainly in the Latin American region, and the key customers of IFC are mainly those multinational players. And then going forward in early and mid 2000, China became our key market. We have invested quite a lot of private-owned water and sanitation projects in China, and we are also looking at some other countries in this region, like Turkey, etc. And then currently, we are moving more upstream, and we are focusing on some improving the industrial or rural water, and we are also supporting the South-South opportunities. Like we support the Singaporean, Korean, Chinese sponsors going outside of their homeland and into the other emerging countries to help you to build the water and sanitation infrastructures. The total portfolio or the total committed and mobilized amount for IFC is over 4 billion in the water and the municipal infrastructure sector since 2008. But this number, because we include also the solid waste and other municipal infrastructure projects into the one group. So this 4 billion total commitment actually is more than just water. So in the East Asia and Pacific region, as I just mentioned, the three pillars of IFC's strategy. So in the first pillar, in this East Asian region, China definitely is the most mature market in this region. But we also face a lot of competition from the large SOEs in China. So in China, we are currently focusing on the rural water investment, as well as the industrial wastewater treatment, and also helping the Chinese companies doing business outside. My IBRD colleagues just mentioned about the Sichuan rural water PPP, and for that project, IFC also participated in the advisory and potentially also in the investment side. And then in some more relatively challenging markets like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, etc., IFC is working on the opening markets and the market creation. And we have already invested, supported a couple of private sector water projects in Vietnam. And we are also working with IBRD colleagues in some other countries and helping the policy reform and looking for private sector investment opportunities. And then pillar 3, in the innovation side, we are very much interested in supporting new technologies and new business models in this region, especially in the desalination and industrial water side. And then the last one, water for industries. This is currently mainly a advisory business, because in many Eastern Asian countries, our advisory colleagues are helping the industrial park managers and the local governments and also the private companies on the water saving, water efficiency advisory. And we are also trying to design some investment platforms helping the investment on these water efficiency projects. So with that, I think I quickly give you an overview of IFC's business in the water space, especially in East Asia. I look forward of traveling again to Singapore. I used to visited the Singaporean Water Week, and I very much look forward to meet many of you in person in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Hao. So there you have it. I think you have a presentation from the bank side and also from the IFC side. And if you have any questions, please do send it through the chat box. I already see some questions that have come in. Maybe we can get started with those, then we can continue as we get more questions coming in. I think we had planned to finish at 10:30, but we can probably go for another 10-15 minutes more. depending on the conversation. So let's get started. I think the first question that came was, how do you select projects to fund in terms of countries and amount to loan? Maybe can I ask Smita if you could take that one?
Sure, thanks, Sudipto. So in terms of how we select the projects to fund, there's a lot of pre-project analysis which happens, especially in terms of looking at the sector issues, the challenges, how these can be addressed. What is the best way of improving? For example, water supply and sanitation. So the bank team does a lot of analytical work in terms of what are the challenges, how these can be addressed. And then there is a dialogue with the counterparts. It could be at the national level, it could be at the state level, which is kind of a pre-project preparation stage. And that leads to firming up of the project concept, and it's submitted through the national, say in India, for example, it's a Department of Economic Affairs, where then it comes formally to the bank. However, the bank would like to address not just policies and institutions, but look at the poverty-related issues and looking at the vulnerable population and how the program can address these as well. So while the overall reforms are very much part of the bank's agenda in terms of improving access, improving sustainable services, along with that, addressing the poverty agenda and addressing the vulnerable population agenda as very much. So there's a series of dialogues, pre-project, and even during the project preparation process, the dialogue continues and till we arrive at a consensus in terms of how best the bank can support through its not just local knowledge, but also global knowledge. So let me stop there. I'm happy to take up more questions.
Thank you, Smita. I look at the questions as they're coming in now. There's another one, which is about preparation for our projects. Question is, what are the studies and consultancies preceding these large infrastructure projects? Does World Bank finance consultancies to seek out best available technologies, better advise and structure these projects? Maybe Lillian, could you take this one on how we prepare projects?
Hi, Sudipto. Sure. So usually the preparation of one of our operations takes about 1 year. It can be less, it can be more, depending on the complexity, depending on the urgency, and etc. In many cases, the bank already has ongoing dialogue with the government, with the sector, even through pre-existing projects or with some knowledge products that are being developed that kind of pave the ground for the bank operation, right? During the preparation time of any specific project, we work with the government on identifying the scope of the investments, where the bank funds will go, how much counterpart funds from the government or from other institutions, from other co-financers will come together to finance the desired scope. What we will achieve with that, what are objectives, what are the goals, and what we are going to achieve with that, and how everything is supposed to be implemented in terms of procurement, financial management, environment, and social management. And all these aspects, they are reviewed and agreed during preparation. Together with the government, also financial economic assessment is carried out, in addition to technical assessments, environment and social, etc. It's important to highlight, my colleague Smita just said that our projects, they do have a strong physical investment components, but they always come together with some institutional development, capacity building, and some, we call it soft part together with that, right? So it's very rare to see a bank project that's only financing infrastructure and nothing else. At least we would support the good, like the sustainable operation maintenance of that infrastructure at minimum, together with some institutional strengthening, capacity building, etc. Around that, right? So in a nutshell, this is how our projects are prepared. And once everything is ready and go to several internal approval stages within the bank, the project is finally submitted for our board for final approval. And after board approval, it can be signed and can start implementation. Okay, Sudipto.
Thank you, Lillian. I also see a lot of questions on China. I think here, how maybe you and I can jointly answer some of these questions. The questions are really around, I would say, like, you know, the loan that the bank or the loans that the bank makes to China, on what basis are they selected? China obviously has the resources. How do we ensure that the resources are being used properly? How do we also ensure that resources used for China is not taking away money for other countries? So there are 3 or 4 questions on this. So maybe how can you start from your side on the private sector side, how you are working with the various counterparts in China when it comes to the water sector? And I can talk from the bank side.
Okay, sure. Yes. From the IFC side, we are getting more and more selective on the project financing in China, as many people just mentioned that China is becoming the second largest economy on the world. So what we are currently focusing on in China is really going to the greener or higher efficiency of development. So greener in the water sector is definitely meaning that we will support the wastewater treatment, and especially the industrial wastewater treatment. So that's perfectly fit in IFC's country strategy in China. And then second, we want to be more inclusive. That means we want to finance more and more in the middle and western part of China. So it could be very difficult for us to get approval from the World Bank, the board, on a big infrastructure project in like cities in like Shanghai or Beijing or Shenzhen, etc. But once we are supporting like Sichuan rural water or something, this would be still very supportive from the World Bank board. And then lastly, we cannot work with the big SOEs in China anymore. So the one of our strategies in China is supporting the private sector and making them sustainable and competing with the SOEs. So if we see good private sponsors in the water sector, we are still very happy to support them in China. So I will stop here from the private sector perspective. Thank you, Sudipta.
Thank you. I think, you know, my answer on China, let me just start with by our overall approach on how we lend to countries. We have what we call a country partnership framework, CPF, through which we agree on a 3-year program that is approved by the bank's board. And as you know, in the World Bank's board, we have representation from various countries, including China. So as part of the CPF, what is agreed is that this would be an envelope of X number of projects valuing to Y billion of dollars. That agreement is still in place in China. In other words, you know, we have an agreement that we will be engaging with China on selected topics, as Hao mentioned. And I think what has happened over time is in China, our projects are typically not the infrastructure focused activities anymore. The attention is more on the institutional side. China has the resources. China could do and build some of the infrastructure. But can you think of international experience that can be brought into China? Can you think of ways to run more things more efficiently? Can you think of institutional changes by which there would be a larger impact, not only in the project where the World Bank is working on, but across the province, across the nation? So that has been our increased focus in years. Now, the other thing that's happening is China obviously has a lot of experience to share. We've worked with China for 40 years now, and we are also kind of summarizing our lessons learned over the years, and we'll take those lessons to countries outside China. And here we have a partnership with China on this, because China's lessons learned in the water sector and other parts of infrastructure sector would be very valuable to many other countries. So I think in terms of sharing knowledge, something that we are also supporting China on. I hope this answers the question. 2 or 3 questions on China. There's one question on guarantees. Maybe Patricia, if you're still online, you could take this one. This is question is specific to the Angola Guarantee Project. It says, can you please highlight first guarantee operation in Angola? What are the major innovations and implications of the first practices, the water GP for this guarantee operation? What are the major challenges in terms of scaling up? And while you're taking this question, Patricia, maybe you can give some other examples of how you're planning to use the liquidity facility. Over to you.
Thank you, Sudipto, and thanks also for the question. Indeed, this was the first World Bank guarantee for the water sector, so it's a project which we like to feature because it's very innovative. By way of background, to say that Luanda, the city where the project was financing the biggest part of the infrastructure, is 7 million people with fast urbanization rates and many areas of informal and peri-urban settlements with a high incidence of waterborne diseases, cholera and typhoid even present. And all in a context of Angola facing a fiscal crisis in 2014 with credit rating going downwards. Undergoing several downgrades. So it's all the more reason to really be optimistic about thinking that even under circumstances like this, such a financing structure can work. And the guarantee is an IBRD guarantee, which provides partial risk coverage against debt service default by the government of Angola. It enabled Angola to leverage almost 1 billion financing, only using 125 million of the country envelope for borrowing from World Bank, with a loan maturity of 15 years, which is the longest commercial tenure achieved for similar projects. It brought about high competition from international banks due to an extensive expression of interest in roadshow processes, also with deep involvement from the World Bank teams. The pricing was a significant improvement to Angola's cost of borrowing compared to a bond issued by the government in 2019. And there were coordinated financial closure and disbursement monitoring processes. So as part, and by the way, the raising of part of the financing is still going on. Some of the lessons learned that the team was highlighting, and this was a mixed team involving a team from the water GP and also from our private sector and guarantees group, IPGs. And I would highlight 3 lessons or conclusions. One, that commercial financing and bankability very much relies on the strength of good quality preparation and risk mitigation, and the fact that commercial banks take comfort in the World Bank due diligence process and the continued engagement by the bank. For sure that the mitigation of technical, fiduciary, and governance risks are critical. For example, in the case of Angola, the World Bank is working closely with the utility on the improvement of the performance of the utility as a means to offset some of the technical risks. And last, the financing process, in order to attract competitive pricing, needs to be extensive enough to include roadshows, robust procurement process to help attract competitive financing terms. We can make available more information if needed on the Angola Guarantee project. And on the other question, which if I recall correctly, is about studies and consultancies preceding large infrastructure projects and whether World Bank can finance some of these consultancies to identify technologies and to structure projects. Indeed, there are different ways to go about project preparation. Oftentimes, World Bank and clients take the opportunity of an existing World Bank project to prepare studies for an upcoming new project. This is something which is typically done. There is also a number of trust funds that the World Bank manages, like for example, the Global Water Security and Sanitation Partnership that I mentioned earlier, but there are other trust-funded resources, some of which can be used to fund feasibility studies for project implementation. There is also a number of facilities like project preparation facilities, which in essence are an advance over the loan that will be then contracted from the World Bank. And there are often times where the client is funding the preparation directly from own revenues. So there is, a whole array of options that can be used to fund the project preparation process. But just to say that we do like to be involved in this process. And when it has not been done prior to our involvement, we definitely advise our clients to really engage on a thorough due diligence for any large infrastructure project involving, the technical study of alternatives, environmental, social studies, all of the necessary due diligence. So thanks. Let me stop here. Maybe other colleagues would like to complement. I hope this addresses the question.
Patricia, one more question, and this maybe how you can also step in on this one. Question is, are there any examples of World Bank supporting pilot interventions and also opportunities for water startups? So I think from the IFC side, you do support private companies. Maybe you can talk about like that side of it. And from the bank side, in our bank operations, we often do pilot activities. And I'll ask my bank colleagues, Shea, Lillian, or Smita, to maybe give 1 or 2 examples of pilot interventions that we've carried out. Show innovation to show knowledge. So how, you first.
Sure, thank you. I actually have many questions, but for the interest of time, I just give one example. And this example is in Vietnam. There is a company, actually a big local sponsor, which is in the manufacturing of a big plastic pipeline. manufacturer. So they used to be a supplier only for the water infrastructure to many of these local SOEs. And then they found of this investment opportunity in the water utility area. So they spin off their one of their business department and starting up the new business of investing in the water pipeline and water utility operation. So they came to IFC and asked the IFC to support their new business. And the IFC found this opportunity very interesting in a country in Vietnam, where the water sector was dominated by SOEs. So we decided to support this sponsor. And IFC invested in a small amount of equity and supporting the company to further privatize the big SOEs, as well as developing new investment opportunities in the water and sanitation utilities. And these investments turned out to be very successful. And the IFC, I think, increased our investment amounts later, and we are helping the company to go to IPO in next couple of years. So this is a very good example.
Thank you. From the bank side, some innovations that you've brought into projects. You have so many examples you could share.
Thanks, Sudipto. So I'd like to share the example from Shimla that we did very recently. So this was using the drones as a technology for mapping of households and of other consumers, customers for the Shimla Water Company. And so the drone did a very fast mapping of the different customers, and that data was integrated with the GIS data, and that helped in the hydraulic modeling for 24/7 supply. So I think this is the first time it was done in India. Very, very successful. It saved time. It saved about 6 to 8 months of time rather than going from individual house to house. This did a rapid survey, and that helped in the customer database. The other example I'd like to very quickly give is on for monitoring and evaluation, especially in the rural areas. We developed a GPS-based a handheld device which had the customer database and questions, and it helped to actually send the data from the rural areas and remote rural areas to the district agencies and to the state level agencies. And this we did for the Uttarakhand Water Supply Sanitation project years ago, and it really caught on and helped in not just sending data but also photographs of toilets which were constructed and also infrastructure. So I'd like to stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Smita.
Sudipta, I can quickly mention 2 examples, one on the technological side and another on the how things can be operated, right? On the technology side, the project in China, both the Lianing project that I quoted and also the Jiangxi rural water projects, they both have very interesting smart water systems financing, and they are really modernizing the water utilities from top to bottom, right, entirely, by using the latest technology for managing everything from the water catchment to the tap, with real-time monitoring using IoT and other modern features. Right, and this is something that the bank is very proud of being supporting, since this is really transforming not only the efficiency of the utility but also the quality of the service to the customer, and also allowing a closer integration between the quality, the customer, and the service provider. Another example is not really on the technology side, but how we can be more effective in promoting results, right? And make sure that the investments generate what they are intended to generate as benefits. So we have been using the program of results financing instrument, in which the bank disburses not only against the built infrastructure, but actually against the results and the benefits that infrastructure is resulting. So it includes providing 24/7 coverage with potable water, with a high reliability and low breakdown of systems. So all of this is measured, and the bank disbursement goes for the results of that. So not only for the infrastructure being delivered. This is something that we have been applying more and more in certain contexts for certain projects. And we still consider that, I mean, as some sort of innovation, moving beyond the traditional method of financing infrastructure and looking more at aspects such as sustainability and the real benefits that infrastructure is supposed to provide to the population. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, there is so much to talk in this whole water sector. I mean, we have, of course, the COVID issues, but more generally, many things happening in the sector. I think for the sake of time, we would have to bring this session to a close soon. But let's continue this discussion. You know, we are based in Singapore. As you know, my name is Sudipta Sarkar. I'm the practice manager based in Singapore, and we have a team in Singapore. But through our team here, you can connect to other parts of the bank. And that's been our kind of overall approach in our partnership with the government, how we can bring knowledge, how we can talk about new ways of, like, you know, developing infrastructure, making sure it's done effectively, and also the financing side of it. So again, I would like to thank SWA and maybe PUB if they're online for making this session possible. I'm going to turn it back to Vivian to bring the session to a close. So thanks again, everybody. I just see that about more than 50 people are connected. So that's a good turnout, I think. Let's carry on this conversation. Over to you, Vivian.
Thank you, Sudipta. We have more than 60 participants today. And thank you, Mr. Tan, Ms. Jyoti, in addressing us today. A big thank you to all speakers for sharing. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you then. Bye now. Bye-bye.
We look forward to seeing you in our next webinar on the 16th of July, Embracing Sustainable Water Solutions in Asia. Meantime, if any of the participants have any questions, you can forward to our SWA Executive Office. Please stay safe and stay well. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vivian.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Guan. Bye-bye.
Bye.